Welcome to Product Interviewing Basics. This is a micro training, and I am Majesty AliNICOLE WOW, and I am joined by Gina Gardiner, and we are excited to just come forth and provide a micro training for you today. We both have an extensive background as it relates to the podcasting arena. And you'll find also in the description a plethora of different resources that we have for multi-level podcasting initiatives. But again, we just want to come and just provide some basics around interviewing, and especially for those of you who are new to podcasting, but also for those of you who have been podcasting for a while, just ways that you can take what you do to the next level. Gina, excited to provide this micro training with you today.
Oh, absolutely. It's great stuff, and people need to know this, I think.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And so I won't get into too much of our backgrounds, as it relates to, because collectively that could take up the whole the whole training, just sharing that. But again, people can learn more within the description. But we know, as it relates to podcasting and being able to interview guests and have different guests featured, that it is important for those who are embarking on this journey to really develop great interviewing skills really off the bat. But we know that you have to jump in somewhere. So don't wait until you're extremely quote unquote polished to do so. Go ahead and jump in. But there are some things that you need to take into consideration. Would you agree, Gina?
Absolutely. The thing is, if you don't jump in, you're never going to develop the skills. But there are ways that you can make it feel safer and easier, not just for you, but also for your guest.
Oh, absolutely. And so there are two really different levels in terms of interviewing, so to speak, or what I like to call just more conversational. So there are ways that you can do the traditional interviewing, where it's just kind of question answer, so to speak. And we'll talk about that. But then also one that is becoming more popular, so to speak, and more desirable is just having the conversational types of podcasting, where sometimes that doesn't have to be so polished, so to speak, because it needs to be kind of just an organic, type of conversation. But there is the interviewing that's weaved into that, but it's more like it's an organic interview that's just happening kind of out of what's emerging. So we can talk about, the two different formats. So Gina, let's talk real quickly about just the traditional format of having the interview, where you are asking a question or creating that type of space, for the guests to be able to showcase themselves, which when you're doing it in that format, it really does need to be that the attention is on the guest getting out what they want to put out, more so than even the opinion of the interviewers, so to speak. So your thoughts around that, and anything else you want to add?
Well, even within there are different styles, and one of those is that you can have a podcast where you have a set of questions that you ask every guest, that's your go-to. And that you have devised those questions to give your guest the opportunity to talk about themselves.
Yes.
You can also ask your guest to come up with the 5 questions or 10 questions, depending on how long your podcast is, or the one question that they would like you to ask them. But I've come across, I've been a guest on many, many podcasts, and so I've seen the best of interviewing techniques, and I've seen the very worst. And I would say that if you are going to be asking people a question, and it's a podcast that's going to be a video as well as an audio, then make sure you know what the questions are, so that people don't just see the top of your head. And even if you are giving your guests the platform, it can become very robotic. I'll ask the question, they'll give the answer. There's no commentary about what they've said. There's no sense that you've listened. And then you ask the next question, and then the next. And so I would say this has to be you taking responsibility for this interview. And even if it is about giving the best of platforms to your guest, you need to be in control of this. You need to take responsibility for the shape of this. And so asking the questions that you want to ask is important. If you're going to give your guest free rein on the questions, you may want to shape that and say, ask 5 questions about the theme. Now, is your podcast eclectic in the themes that it chooses, or is it a podcast which is about a particular areas? So, for example, I might have a podcast where all of my guests are talking about leadership. So I need to recognize that the conversation or the interview questions need to be focused on what I want the listener to get out of it in terms of the theme. So again, take responsibility for that. Don't be a victim to whatever they want to give you.
Right.
And I would say, unless you know the person really, really well, my rule of thumb is I want to talk to every guest that comes on to any of my podcasts or my radio show or whatever. I want to talk to them to be clear that that they speak well and that they know their stuff, but also that they are going to be giving value. And you can get caught very badly. And I've listened to podcasts where the guest is quite literally grim. They can't string 2 words together, that you're waiting for them to make up their mind about how they're going to answer things. So be proactive, take charge. And if you're going to be asking questions or asking them to give you the questions, then take charge of those questions.
Absolutely. And that was magnificently stated. That's the training there, right there. We will get into, the other aspect that was so important. And I'm glad you brought up in terms of having the control. And that's something definitely, over the years, which we both do interviewing, and we've been, featured multi-levels on, on different platforms. And it is important in terms of, yes, when you bring a guest on and the platform is for them in terms of that segment to shine, so to speak. But Gina made some great points, is that you do have to still understand it is your podcast, and you do have to have that range of control, and that plays a part in, yes, the interviewing skills, but also just your authority in terms of, having the platform itself. Yes, there is there for other people to shine, but it has to be a win-win, and it has to be where it is very much a collaborative, natural, organic conversation that's taking place, even though there are maybe some preset questions. And as Gina said, you need to know your stuff, but she laid it out perfectly. So Gina, what we can talk about really quickly is the second variation of podcasting and interviewing, which is more so, as I mentioned, the more desirable style and format of the conversation. And so when you're having the conversation, which it seems like when you're doing traditional interview, it is a conversation, but this nature of it takes on a different tone, a different texture, so to speak, because it's not just as you mentioned, kind of the robotic autopilot, and not the interviewer being kind of engaged and not ready to just move on to the next question. The conversational piece of it being just organic is more of a free-flowing, I believe, and have seen and experienced throughout the years, that produces the best types of outcomes for the podcaster, the guest, and also the listeners. So you and I do a lot of conversational trainings, and we also do a lot of conversational podcast types of experiences, much like what we're doing now, though it is a micro training, so to speak. Now, your more recent podcast that you have is more organic in conversation. So would you like to talk a little bit about, make some distinctions in the nature of that type of podcasting
Yeah.
and what you just shared?
I think one of the challenges as an interviewer on an organic conversational podcast or training is it's multi-layered. When you've
Yes.
got questions, you have a structure and you stick to the structure. And as long as your guest knows what's going on and you know what's going on, that's fine. But with an organic conversation, I think the skill of the person who is leading it or facilitating it is about how you set it up, both in terms of what the other person who's speaking is expecting to happen rather than catching them out, but also so the listener understands what they can expect out of it. And then I think it's really important that you recognize that the skill of being an interviewer in this particular context is as much about listening and taking out the salient points, or asking a subsidiary question, or being able to lead that conversation into a new framework or a new area. And that's a learnt skill. Some people do it naturally, but I would say it's one of those things where the more experienced you are, the more seamless it can feel. And the danger with that is people looking in think it's easy. In many ways, there has to be either a very high level of experience and functionality of both people involved, or it has to be orchestrated before, in terms of, we're going to do this, it's going to be organic, but this is where we want to end, by the end of the program, that's what we're aiming for the listener to get out of it, so that everybody's got some sense of the destination.
Right.
And the less experienced you are, the more you need to be clear about that if it's your podcast.
Absolutely.
Now, Ali Nicole and I will have a title. Sometimes there's preparation, and particularly, this is what we're going to cover. This is what we're going to go out with in very high level strategic format. But most of the time now, because we know each other so well, and because we trust one another to have the understanding and the experience, that we will set off and the journey will evolve quite organically. If you try that with people that you don't know and who are not confident about wherever the conversation is going to go, you're setting yourself and them up for disaster. So I would say you need to be prepared, but preparing in a different way to the list of questions. It's understanding ultimately, what do you want the people who are listening to get out of this? What value do you want to add to them? And then knowing that the person that you're working with is going to work in harmony with you to actually deliver that.
Absolutely. And that was magnificently stated.
Thank you.
Magnificently stated. Absolutely. And the reason why we wanted to come forth to provide this is because there are different levels of skill. And of course, we do want individuals to get in, jump in, because as Gina mentioned too, that is the only way that you are going to start perfecting your craft. Because even when you have training in this area, you still have to continue to master the craft by doing it. It's not enough just to listen to other podcasts, and it's not enough to study even the podcast industry or just the nature of it. You literally have to continue to be in it, to continue to evolve, to continue to perfect. So it's not a textbook thing. Even if you learn the best ways to interview, the best ways to apply skills, until you actually apply it and you consistently keep doing it, that is the only way that you're going to get better. So in terms of bringing this, micro training to a close, what we really most desire for you to do is, of course, to take away from this the value that you can start to get into action and start to test yourself out over, the next, I would say, month or so, and keep building upon that to see how well you're doing. And that's not judging yourself or putting yourself up against another podcasters, so to speak, whether they've been seasoned or even they're a beginner. It's about knowing yourself and your level and your capacity, and giving yourself the leeway to keep evolving. But you do need to be in the game and start applying this. Gina, your thoughts before we close out here?
I would say, like anything, the more you do it, the better you'll get. But if you really have never done any of this, then start off by being a guest on other people's shows and get a feel for what it's like on the guest side. And you don't need to do many of those before you start to think, well, I like that style, I'll try that one out. And then have a go with people that you know, people that are perhaps friends or colleagues, and say, let's just play. And rather than putting yourself under huge pressure, just give it a go. And then you'll find it get easier.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gina. And on the note of what you just said, Gina and I do have a plethora of products for sure within the description. But one that I would really like to point out that really kind of works in concert, if you will, with this particular micro training is one around being able to get featured on podcast and also finding guests and using the duality focus, of that. And I also have a free training as well, the benefits of being able to have a dual podcast empire where you are doing interviewing and getting, having featured guests, on your platform too. So I'll link that in the description. But the product that I was mentioning just a moment ago will really benefit you. It's a micro training to a mini masterclass, so to speak, that really starts to flesh out more of you and your podcasting empire building, so to speak, and emphasizing the importance of getting featured. And then the importance of finding quality guests for your podcast. So we just wanted, again, to provide this, for you. So again, take away what you feel is going to be most valuable for you to start implementing. As I mentioned, give yourself at least starting off 30 days to kind of play around with this, but you'll continue to evolve it. So Gina, before we close out, is there any parting word that you would like to leave the listeners with before we close this training out?
It's a very powerful medium to use. And I would say to you, first and foremost, get yourself onto other people's podcasts. There are lots of, if you Google how to be a guest, there are lots of directories where you can put up your profile, maybe tech, for example, and go and give it a go. And then at the same time, just record some podcasts. Don't necessarily have to put them on anything, do them over Zoom, and then listen back to them and look back and think, well, how could I improve that? And take it incrementally. And very quickly you will find what works for you, your style. It has to be authentic to you, but ultimately get going, because in doing so, you'll get better.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Oh,
Gina.
pleasure.
This has been fabulous. And in closing, I would just like to just emphasize that really active listening and mindful listening will benefit you tremendously as an interviewer, and being present so that you can really accurately engage the process and be intently immersed into the experience. But we know that you're going to go out there and you're going to be the absolute best, but you can only become the best the more you do it, as we've emphasized today. So we're wishing you the absolute best with your podcasting initiatives, and reach out, of course, if you need further assistance, so to speak. As I mentioned in the description, you'll find a plethora of resources, more that you can learn about Gina and I, even in other areas, and contact information. So yes, go out there and get your podcast interviewing skills on, whether you're in the hot seat yourself being interviewed or you are being the interviewer. Either way, we just want you to go out there and do it, and we know that you will have great success. All right, so we hope to have you join us on future trainings that we provide, and we look forward to being back with you at another time. Take care, and wishing you the absolute best.